Welcome back to your channel Leo Storyland. Here we uncover a real Reddit story. If you liked my video, please like, share, subscribe. My name is Cora Whitfield and I'm 27 years old. 3 days before I gave birth, my husband Weston died in a house fire that started in our garage, and by the time the paramedics pulled him out, there was nothing left to save. I found out while I was folding tiny onesies in the nursery, my hands still resting on my swollen belly, when 2 firefighters knocked on my door with faces that told me everything before they said a single word. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember the drive to my parents' house that night because I couldn't be alone. I only remember waking up on their couch 3 days later with contractions ripping through me, and my mother driving me to the hospital in silence because apparently even that felt like too much to ask of her. I gave birth alone. My mother dropped me at the entrance and said she'd be back, and she never came upstairs. The nurses kept asking where my support person was, and I kept saying she's coming, until I stopped saying it at all. I held my daughter for the first time with tears soaking into the hospital blanket, and I named her Everly, because Weston had picked that name out for a girl months before the fire took him. I texted my mother a photo. She never replied. My father sent one message. "Call us when you're discharged. We need to talk about arrangements." Arrangements? I thought he meant funeral flowers, or maybe help moving my things out of the house Weston and I had shared, since the fire had gutted half of it and I couldn't go back there with a newborn. I was wrong. On the morning I was discharged, I sat in a wheelchair in the hospital lobby with Everly wrapped against my chest, waiting for my father's car, feeling more fragile than I had in my entire life. When he pulled up, he didn't get out to help me. My mother sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead like I was a stranger she was doing a favor for. I climbed in the back with my daughter, my body still aching, my stitches still raw, and I thought maybe finally they'd say something kind. Instead, my father looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, "You're discharged now. Take the baby and go back to his family." I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. My mother turned around in her seat, her face cold in a way I'd never seen before, and added, "Widows aren't our responsibility. You have a husband's family for a reason. Go be theirs now." I sat there in the back seat of my own father's car, holding my 4-day-old daughter, and I understood for the first time in my life that my parents saw me as a burden that had simply been passed off to someone else for 27 years, and now that the someone else was dead, they intended to pass me right back off to whoever would take me. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. Something in me went very quiet and very still, the way water goes still right before it freezes solid. "Where do you want me to go?" I asked, and my voice didn't even shake. "Wherever," my father said. "You're bad luck, Cora. Ever since you married that man, bad things happened. The fire proves it. We can't have that near us." Bad luck. That was the phrase he used. Like I was a curse instead of his daughter, like the fire that killed my husband was somehow a mark I carried instead of a tragedy that had happened to me. My mother nodded along like he'd said something reasonable, something obvious, and I realized neither of them were going to apologize. Not now, not ever, because in their minds there was nothing to apologize for. They dropped me and Everly on the curb outside an extended stay motel 20 minutes from the hospital, my father barely stopping the car long enough for me to get the car seat out, and then they drove away without looking back. I stood on that curb in the July heat with my daughter against my chest and a hospital bag over my shoulder, and I made exactly one phone call. Not to a friend, not to a shelter. I called the only person Weston had ever told me to call if something happened to him, a man he'd known his entire life, a man he trusted more than his own blood. His voice answered on the second ring, warm and steady in a way that nearly broke me all over again. "Cora," he said. "What's wrong?" I told him everything, my voice finally cracking on the last word, and there was a silence on the other end of the line that felt heavier than anything my parents had said to me that entire morning. When he finally spoke again, his voice wasn't warm anymore. It was flat and calm and absolutely certain. "Text me your parents' address," he said. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming, and I'm bringing people with me." I didn't know yet what that meant. I didn't know that within the hour, my father's hands would be shaking so badly he could barely hold his own front door open, or that the quiet, careful life my parents had built for themselves was about to come apart in less time than it takes to make a pot of coffee. All I knew, standing on that curb with my daughter asleep against my chest, was that for the first time in 3 days, I wasn't alone anymore. Desmond Voss had been Weston's godfather since before Weston could walk, and in the 20 minutes it took him to reach the motel where I stood clutching Everly, he'd already made 3 phone calls I didn't know about yet. When his black SUV pulled into the parking lot, he stepped out in a suit that looked like it belonged in a boardroom, not a rundown motel off the highway, and the first thing he did was take one look at my face and pull me into a hug so gentle it undid the last thread of composure I'd been holding on to since the hospital. "You're not staying here," he said, taking the diaper bag from my shoulder before I could argue. "Not for one more night." He put Everly's car seat in the back of his SUV himself, checking every buckle twice with hands that were steady and sure, and I remember thinking that this was the first time since Weston died that anyone had touched my daughter like she mattered. He didn't ask me where I wanted to go. He simply said, "Your parents' house. I want you there when I speak to them." I hesitated, my stomach twisting at the thought of facing that cold, quiet living room again. "Desmond, I don't think I can walk back in there." "You don't have to say a word," he said, starting the engine. "You just have to be present. This isn't your fight to finish, Cora. It's mine." The drive to my parents' house took 18 minutes, and Desmond spent most of it on the phone, his voice low and businesslike, mentioning things like account access and estate documents and a name I didn't recognize at first, until I realized he was talking to his own attorney. I didn't understand yet what he was building, but I understood the tone. It was the tone of a man who had stopped being patient the moment he heard what my parents did to their daughter and granddaughter 3 days postpartum. When we pulled into the driveway, my father was outside trimming the hedges, the picture of a man untouched by consequence, until he saw Desmond's SUV and his shears slowed, then stopped entirely. My mother appeared in the doorway a moment later, arms crossed, her expression already arranging itself into the same cold mask she'd worn in the car that morning. Desmond didn't rush. He walked up their front path like he owned it, and for the first time, I saw my father's confidence flicker. "Mr. Whitfield," Desmond said, his voice pleasant, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. "I understand you had some thoughts about who's responsible for your daughter and granddaughter." My father's jaw tightened. "This isn't your business." "It became my business the moment you put a woman 4 days postpartum and a newborn out on a curb," Desmond said, still calm, still pleasant. "So let's make it official business, since apparently that's the only language you respect." He explained plainly and without raising his voice that Weston hadn't just left Cora a house and a life insurance policy. He'd left a trust, one Desmond himself administered as executor, one that named my parents as beneficiaries of a small but meaningful annual gift Weston had quietly arranged years ago, a private gesture of goodwill toward the in-laws he'd always tried to stay close to despite their coldness toward me. That gift, Desmond explained, was conditional on Weston's wishes for his wife and child being honored, and abandoning us on a curb, he said, was not honoring anything. My mother's face went pale. My father's shears finally hit the ground. "You can't just cut us off," my father said, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. "I can, and as of this morning I have," Desmond said, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket and holding it out, not to intimidate, just to make it real. "But this isn't really about money, is it? It's about the fact that you looked at your own daughter, 27 years old, 3 days a widow, for days a mother, and decided she was someone else's problem. Weston knew people like you exist in this world. That's exactly why he made sure Cora would never have to depend on you for anything again." My father's hands were shaking now, the paper trembling as he took it from Desmond, and my mother said nothing at all, her earlier coldness replaced by something that looked almost like fear. I stood at the end of the driveway holding my daughter, watching 2 people who had spent my whole life making me feel small suddenly look smaller than I ever had. Desmond didn't gloat. He simply turned, walked back to me, and said quietly, "Let's go home, Cora. You and Everly have a house waiting, fully repaired, fully yours, whenever you're ready for it. No rush." I didn't look back at my parents as we drove away. I didn't need their apology anymore, because for the first time since the fire, I understood that my daughter and I already had everything we needed, a family that showed up, a home that was waiting, and a promise Weston had made long before either of us knew how badly we'd need it. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally never do, and sometimes the ones who choose to love you anyway are the ones who save you.